Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to session 6. I think we're on session 6. What a day it has been so far. We have had some absolutely fantastic conversations, and I am particularly excited about this next one, as I am joined by the one and only. He's the European head of content at Money 2020. It is Mr. Ian Horne. Welcome.
Hi, Amelia. Firstly, how are you getting on? You've done 6 hours of these, right? You must be
Yeah,
you must be knackered, to put it
it's
nicely.
I think it's interesting putting it on a Friday as well, isn't it? I think it's you go, oh yeah, we'll ease into the end of the week. No, 7 hours of podcast. You go, okay then. But no, it's been good. I mean, I've been joined by some interesting people, so that helps.
Yeah.
It helps that we're having interesting conversations. But I think I will sleep pretty well tonight. I
Oh,
think
for
that is
sure.
fair to
For sure.
say.
I also love that you say the one and only. As you know, I've just written my first book, and it's only when you go to Amazon to register yourself as an author, you realize how many people actually share your name. There's like 80 Ian Horns,
No,
which
there's
isn't
not.
fair. So I might put a copyright claim on it or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm sure that's illegal, but hey.
Well, Kylie Jenner tried to copyright the name Kylie, didn't she? Kylie Minogue was having none of it. She said,
Yeah,
no, you
so
can't have it.
I'll give it a go, see how it goes. I'll get back to you.
Perfect. Well, I look forward to hearing all about that. So, with our podcast, the way we like to kick things off is just to find a little bit about what you get up to on a day-to-day basis. So, what does a day in the life of Ian Horne look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a strange one. So the role that I do, as you rightly said, I'm EU head of content at Money 2020, which means that my year largely pivots around a show at the start of June, which is the liveliest, most fun fintech show in Europe. Like it's honestly so cool to be part of it, but it means that my year kind of takes a seasonal approach. So right now we're 3 weeks out from the show. I'm doing the research. I'm starting the research side of things. So I'm basically about to begin calling people from across payments and banking and tech and venture cap, and basically getting their feedback on what's going to be big next year, what they enjoyed about this year. So my day to day is going to be quite fun, actually, just speaking to people in tech that are making big decisions and doing exciting things. So that's a really awesome thing to be able to do. Other than that, I mean, outside of work, I'm not that exciting. I, you know, get up early some mornings. I do a bit of blogging. I'm about to start launching a Substack to go alongside the book that I've done. And then in the evenings, I am fairly boring. I still, in the back of my mind, think I'm a football player. So I still play football quite a lot, a few nights a week. So that'll be me. My life isn't all that exciting. But hey, I live in London and I do tech. And yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
what to
I'd
expect.
say it's pretty exciting. I wouldn't put yourself down so much. I think it sounds great. And I mean, we talk about tech, and that is why we're here today. That is what we're here to talk about. And I've known you a little while now, and it's like tech and specifically kind of fintech has always been something that you found really interesting. And I mean, even just today, it's interesting to a lot of people because every single person that I have talked to when recording the podcast today has mentioned AI or tech or some form of technological
Yeah.
advancement. So, looking at that topic, what drew you to that kind of space and why do you find it interesting?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it was the prospect of seeing Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have a fight. That was the main thing that got me into this space. But no, really, I don't know about you, but you and I both started our kind of office careers in finance, both at Citywire as well. And finance isn't something I ever intended to do. It's just something that I'd finished a degree. I was kind of a bit lost and then thought I'd do this job, and it turned out to be a really cool job. I loved speaking to financial advisors and wealth managers across the UK. But one thing that I think was always key to me was if I'm going to do a job that wasn't my initial first kind of thought, then I at least want to focus it on something that matters to me and something that I think is important. So actually, I kind of came to tech a long way around. I started with ESG. My first real care was, and again, I did this. I'm going back about 9 years now. I wanted to cover the ESG market and green finance and ethical investing because I thought, one, if you're going to be involved in finance, do something that you can actually feel comfortable about. But secondly, the other side is I saw it as the future. I saw it as the unavoidable future of the industry. We couldn't keep turning our backs on things like climate change or on unethical practices and all the rest. I just didn't see it sustainable. Anyway, I kind of pushed really hard on that for a few years. I didn't get too far of it, to be honest. I mean, I got to interview some cool people, I got to write some cool articles, and then I kind of started thinking, okay, ESG kind of happened anyway, as I was doing that, and I wanted to do something else that I thought would have some impact. So I pitched a load of different ideas to the board, as you know, at Citywire, and the one that they liked was fintech. And this was one of like 4 or 5 things I thought could be cool, and I'm really glad they took faith in that idea, because it was only when I started exploring it I realized what an opportunity there is. Um, Firstly, tech is reshaping everything that we do. I mean, it always does.
Yeah.
And we're in a really exciting time right now, just in terms of human history, especially with conversations that are happening around AI, in finance as well, around data and open banking. There's loads of really, really interesting things going on, which I think are going to shape the future of people's lives. And that's when it really kind of clicked with me that technology was the area I wanted to focus on, when I realized that, one, it was going to have this massive impact on financial advice and wealth management, both in terms of investment technology, but also in terms of behavioral finance, the things that we can do to better understand people and help them make better financial decisions. And then secondly, there are these huge, huge conversations about the future of money and the future of society. I mean, they're linked.
Mm.
So I just found technology to be absolutely fascinating, and I love the kind of bigger questions. I love getting kind of stuck into things that are too big to solve, and I think that's why technology was such a thing for me. So I took a really odd route, but it was generally about wanting to be where the action is and wanting to,
Yeah.
and also wanting to have a conversation with people that I think are trying to make the world better. I'm not saying they all are. Obviously, there's plenty of nonsense, you know, but I wanted to be doing something
Yeah.
that felt meaningful.
Definitely. And I remember you saying you quite liked that they were all in hoodies and didn't wear shirts and ties as well
Yeah,
when you
it's
go to a
obvious I
tech
don't
firm.
wear a suit anymore. I mean, I sometimes wear a suit and a t-shirt, and I did that at the last show we did actually, and I did it purely because the hotel I was at didn't have an iron. So, it wasn't actually such a well. I'm still finding it odd though. My first day in this job, right? I'm turning up to a fintech company in central London. I turned up to work on my first day wearing a blue suit, and everyone just stared at me. I've never felt like such an idiot in all my life. So I quickly learned that hoodies and t-shirts are fine. Yeah, there seems to be a whole dress code. It's smart casual. It makes no sense, but I'll roll with it. It's fun.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? And there's so much to it. The topic is so dense and constantly evolving. There's no way that you could just be fully on top of everything and go, well, I know everything there is to know now. It's that done. It's just right. What's next? What's next?
Mhm.
What's next? And so, as you mentioned, you have written a book on it, and I'm going to read the title because it's not a short title. So it is Why DeFi Matters, What Crypto Assets, Web3, and the Metaverse Really Mean for Finance. So that explores kind of the impact of decentralized finance, crypto assets, Web3, and the metaverse on the financial industry. Maybe just to kind of give a bit of a grounding in each of those things, could you, let's start one by one, maybe give a brief overview of what these concepts are and why they're
Yeah.
significant? So perhaps starting with crypto assets.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think before I do that, the challenge with the book was that I'd come at this from speaking to financial advisors and wealth managers, and
Mm,
clients must have asked them constantly about crypto. And I feel like if you're trying to understand what's going on in crypto, there's really no easy way. There are either people trying to sell you something, or on the other hand, there are some people who just outright hate the stuff. Like some people really, really hate decentralized finance.
mm,
And I felt that it was really hard taking a kind of journalistic approach to figure out what the hell was going on. So I've written this book to try and offer some nuance, some balance, and some understanding of firstly how DeFi came about, secondly what it is, thirdly to get beneath some of these buzzwords like NFTs and Web3 and the metaverse, and finally to actually say what the real story is for all this stuff. So yeah, as you can see, that title is necessarily filled with buzzwords,
absolutely, yeah.
um, but to kind of unpack them, I'm going to try and do it chronologically, which is going to be tricky.
Okay, yeah.
And so crypto, I mean, that all started with Bitcoin. The whole idea is someone, Satoshi Nakamoto writes this pseudonymous white paper explaining a way we can do transactions and currency without the need for intermediaries. Now, this is the kind of seeds of the whole thing. And the idea is that in the future, we can have a currency in a world that doesn't rely on central banks, commercial banks, or even other financial intermediaries. Now, that in itself is a really wild concept. I think what we see with crypto is people talk about it in terms of line goes up, line goes down. Maybe there's a hack, maybe there's a fraud, maybe there's a scam, maybe there's a Ponzi scheme, so on. But actually, this idea that someone has created code, which is money, which people are willing to trade for a given value, which hasn't been hacked, well, Bitcoin hasn't, is actually really powerful. And I think there's something in that that needed to be kind of explored. Um, then you kind of go from there to crypto assets more broadly, because obviously there's not just Bitcoin now. Now, one, a lot
Yeah.
of this stuff is open source code, so people can copy it. Also, people, there are loads of programmers trying to build their own thing and do Bitcoin, but better, do it more efficiently, doing it in a way that's less destructive to the climate, doing it in all sorts of, other ways, shapes, and forms. And that kind of loosely brings you into DeFi. DeFi is this idea that actually, if we make Bitcoin more programmable, it can do more things. We can get this digital money to do what the financial ecosystem currently does today. So rather than it just being used for transactions, we can now use it for derivatives, or we can use it for lending or something more complex, and we can do that by building applications and protocols that allow it to do that. So already you've got money, non-governmental or non-corporate money, which can do things that our financial system does, and people have put loads of money into. And to give an idea of that, the market cap of crypto at its peak was about $3 trillion. I think the GDP of the world, per annum is about 100 trillion. So to give you some, it's not taking over everything right now, but at its height, you had a seriously valuable thing there now, and now it's about 1 trillion. But I think what I'm trying to get across is that someone's created this digital money. The impact of it is non-trivial, and it's worth paying attention to. And it's all, and it's not all a scam. Don't get me wrong, there is lots of that going on. There's
Yeah.
tons of that going on. It will keep headline writers busy for years, I'm sure. But I wanted to kind of point out there was a more of a story. So those are the first two things. I know there's several buzzwords I've not got around to, but I don't know if there's anything there you want to pick up on or go back
I
to.
mean, loads of things. I guess maybe let's stick with crypto for a little bit then,
Mhm.
and kind of dig down into that. Yes, there's obviously lots of not great areas there that are being hacked, and it's not as safe. And there's some better areas that are offering some more promising kind of opportunities for the future. I guess a question that is quite interesting is looking at its trajectory and where it's moving. Is it possible to ban it, or is it something that is only just going to keep going? Is it possible that at some point there can be something to stop it, or is that it? The floodgates are open.
Yeah, it's such a massive question, that, and it's such a common question. When I was trying to tackle that in the book, I thankfully know a few lawyers who work in this space, and they were really helpful and helped me unpack it. I think one of the biggest qualms of trying to shut down crypto is that it's code. It's all online, and people often compare closing down crypto or banning crypto to banning the internet. It's really hard to do. How you would go about doing it isn't even obvious. So one, a ban might not even be effective, and two, there are ethical concerns around banning something which is just people freely sharing data. That it's not
Sure.
necessarily something that we should ban. The tricky thing, obviously, is that regulators are coming in now. Large parts of the market really welcome that, especially the kind of centralized or CeFi space they call it, that's still dealing with crypto assets, but it's regulated businesses and professionals handling that. Now, that is good for that market. I think if people want to trade these things with some kind of recourse or with some consumer protection, then the introduction of regulation will help with that. The challenge that I think we have, and something that I mentioned in the book, and I don't think there's a neat answer to this, is that many of these assets are unregulated. So you've got regulated entities trading unregulated assets, and I don't know where that takes us. I don't know. Um, one of the key tenets of decentralized finance was to remove intermediaries. Now you've got people trading these assets and becoming intermediaries to do it and making money for themselves in the process. the whole thing is kind of tricky right now. So can you ban it? I would say no. Can you regulate it? Absolutely. How effective will that be? I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, as you were saying, you you enter into so many different regulatory risks that don't exist with other things like hacking risk and also market risk. I mean, the fluctuations of the price of Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the other assets are massive. So
Mm.
it means there's a there's enhanced risk of consumer loss, but it brings us back to a conversation that happens all the time in crypto, which is this kind of this challenge between consumer protection and individual liberties. Because if you stop people from participating in one of the fastest growing asset classes, or possibly the fastest growing asset class of the last 10 years, is that really a good thing? And then separately, um, people are still getting hacked and scammed and defrauded. Do you just sit there and do nothing? I think it's such a difficult question. I'm glad I just get to write about it rather than having to make
Yes.
those decisions.
Yes.
Um, but what we do see is different jurisdictions taking moves to either put themselves out there as a liberal regulator or a clear regulator. I mean, Europe has just put out its MiCA regulation, which makes the landscape for crypto assets far clearer for people operating in Europe. The SEC in America are they currently seem very anti at the moment. I don't know where we're headed with that, but there definitely appears to be a crypto kind of clamp down. There may be all sorts of reasons for that. It might, it could link as far back as the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency, and maybe they're worried about the growth of crypto. But we're looking really long term with stuff like that, and that's getting
Yeah.
speculative at this point.
Yeah. And so obviously a lot of this stuff is kind of theoretical or speculative or, just musing about ideas. If you are a financial planner now, in terms of crypto, how much do you think you should pay attention to? Do you think it should just be something that is, okay, it's over there, it's not anything I'm going to deal with? Is it something that you think you should kind of stay on top of to inform yourself, or is it something that actually should be a keen interest of yours to really track where the future is going? Where would you sit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Two sides with that. I mean, one, I'm not the FCA, and on the other hand, I'm also mindful of. I remember when the GameStop saga was going on, and people were writing, this is not financial advice. I eat crayons and things like that. I'm going to give you my I eat crayons answer, and say
Yeah.
don't trust what I say necessarily. But actually, to be honest, I'd be risk averse as a financial planner here. There's no reason for you to bring this into a client portfolio. It's horrendously risky. You're not you're not really putting your average client into high risk venture cap right now. Why would you then put them in something even riskier? It could in time become a really useful and interesting diversifier. Um, Again, that needs to be monitored, and the performance of Bitcoin hasn't always been that uncorrelated from markets actually, which is surprising to some. I don't think you need to know about it right now, but I think when you might need to know about it is when clients turn up and have some holdings of it, which I think will be increasingly commonplace, and may become very, very normal in years to come, that a lot of people that on your books have these assets. Now, I don't know the correct approach to that, but I interviewed when I was at Citywire, funnily enough, an advisor out in America who had made some money on Ethereum, had made hundreds of thousands of dollars on that, and then actually had found a niche for advising younger people on crypto. And his approach to it genuinely was to take the investment, include it in the financial plan, but write its value down to zero. So every plan that he did had those assets listed as zero. So he acknowledged them, he would tell them what he thought of them, but when you send that plan, this is it's gambling money, I guess.
Yeah.
I think if you're operating in a regulated environment, regardless of whether or not that's your view of the asset, I think that's a sensible line to take.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great answer. And so there's so much in this world that I want to try and cover. So if we can move on kind of to look at blockchain now. So
Hmm.
blockchain technology has, it's got a lot of attention in recent years. How do you see blockchain kind of revolutionizing traditional banking systems, and what are some kind of practical applications to this technology that we might be able to expect in the future?
Yeah, sure. So blockchain's really interesting because it's a change. It's kind of an evolution of distributed ledger technology, which put in more layman terms is accounting. It's basically made it easier for us to keep records, and that is it's creating loads of excitement, and it's also one of the dullest things to explain. Like it's improved record keeping. So I think a lot of the things where it will build efficiencies will be actually back office things, where that we won't necessarily see. We won't even know we're dealing with blockchain. I can't speak to much of that stuff because it doesn't really take my interest that much. I've not really written about it, but I think that's one thing to be aware of. It's a record keeping technology. The other side is well, I mean, there's so much. If I was picking three things for banking, it would probably be well, I'd say tokenization of assets. It would be verifications, um, and it would be payments. I mean, the payment system is built on fairly outdated infrastructure, which isn't even inefficient. It's actually pretty good at what it does, but I think blockchain can make it far better,
Mm.
far quicker, and those savings can be passed on. So I'll start with let's start with payments. Now, on the wholesale side of payments, which is payments between major banks and central banks, trillions change hands every day. Um, but in reality, it's actually far less once you aggregate these payments. And I don't want to get into that; it's boring. But what blockchain can do is, and I've heard this from people that are building technology to basically introduce blockchain to cross-border wholesale payments. Theoretically, it can add billions of savings into these systems by making the swaps between banks instantaneous, making settlement far easier. Basically, it can take days to make major payments between major banks, and that means that people have lots of assets tied up on their balance sheets, which means that causes all sorts of costs and prevents them from doing all sorts of things. So that's one thing, wholesale payments. If we look at retail payments, which is the payments you or I make or small businesses make to a commercial bank, um, that really depends on where currency goes. Blockchain, in a sense, uh, could be integrated into existing payment methods. Sure, it could be used to make remittances cheaper via a stable coin or via a central bank digital currency. This stuff's all being built, and there's arguments over how it's going to happen. But I think people are starting to cotton on that you can remove delays from the payment system theoretically. Obviously, there's so much to unpack. There are all sorts of other things that stand in the way, such as regulation. Um, yeah, so potentially big
Yeah.
changes, big savings, but it's a lot. Tokenization is one that I think really interests me, and if you're involved more on the wealth management side or investment portfolios, I think is really interesting too. So this is the idea that we can display the value of anything and ownership of anything on chain, which is on blockchain. And where that becomes interesting is if you can bring assets on chain and you can then fractionalize them. So say you own a property in Mayfair, let's just say that, let's go monopoly with it, and I can then put that into 10,000 different tokens, but it all represents ownership, and dividends or whatever are paid out accordingly. I can then sell that on chain. Now, where that's interesting is it adds liquidity, it makes it easier to do things, it means the transfer of ownership is far quicker, theoretically. And it potentially, that sort of thing moves us towards a position where we can trade more things, we can have more liquidity and alternative assets, and I think it basically makes investment portfolios more interesting, and enhances access to asset classes that wasn't previously available. So that's kind of an emerging space, but people are already doing this with real estate. People are already putting property on chain, and you can do it with all sorts of things. Notionally, you can do it with artwork, for instance, and then you can do all sorts of things. If you have programmable money or if you have programmable assets, you can you know NFTs, for instance, you can loan an
Yeah.
NFT and then get it back. If we enter a world where people start going to NFT art galleries, for instance, then suddenly the ownership of the asset becomes quite interesting. But you can get so deep on this stuff, Amelia. Seriously,
Yeah.
that's why the buzzwords are all in there. There's tons, and it really does become quite once you learn one thing, you then find another thing, and then you find another thing. The last thing I was going to mention was verification. So
Hmm.
when we talk about the future of money and the future of finance, ID and who we are is really important, not just in a crypto sense. So if we look at open banking, for instance, if banks and service providers know everything about us, know how we spend our money, know what we do and how we do it, they'll be able to offer better services for us. And that's great, but do we want people to know all that stuff? So crypto kind of has that anarchic streak to it. It comes about this idea of, why should anyone know what I'm doing? Why should anyone track my payments? Um, but where DeFi has kind of elevated that is people are now looking at building verification methods where you can prove who you are without sharing that information with anyone. And there are systems called zero knowledge proofs, or there are soul-bound tokens being worked on. This again is very much the forefront, the kind of bleeding edge of technology. But blockchain in this respect could be a massive improvement for verification and ID. So that
Yeah.
that I think could filter through into other areas of the financial system. How it does so and when or if it does so, again, I'm not as confident on that. But if we're looking at ways that blockchain can change things, then I think that's one really interesting way.
I mean, for a topic that you said doesn't really interest you, it seems like you found quite a lot of stuff to draw out there. I mean, that's the point of all of this, isn't it? It's so dense. Like just one thing,
Yeah,
like you said, there's it's the next thing and the next thing, and if you've got this and the knock-on effect
yeah,
here, and it just creates this whole world that is very entangled. And I think that that's kind of sometimes the barrier that people find when trying to educate themselves on this, is that where do you start if
yeah.
this whole kind of blob of mix of intertangled wires of how this
Yeah, but
subculture works.
exactly that, like wonderfully put. Like it's very confusing. There's no if X then Y. It's never as simple as that with crypto. Whenever you learn about something, you then realize there's something else, and you need to look at something else. And I think that's been one of the really fun things about learning about it. Right, it's
Mm,
huge, and I think that's where when people try and tell you that crypto's the future or crypto's everything and whatever, it switches people off, and I can see why. I'm also not someone that's going to say that, but the key thing here is that blockchain's a really interesting development. It's a change to the way that we can keep records in a kind of cryptographically secured way, and that the implications of that are actually quite significant and quite far-reaching. So I think that's what's kind of overlooked in this. It's not that blockchain has to be everything, but we've kind of fundamentally changed something that's quite central to finance. And when you change something that's actually quite at the core of finance, then I think the kind of things that come from that are far-reaching, nuanced, complex, but exciting too. So it really is quite game-changing stuff. I mean, if you want to throw something else out there, there are also people working in quantum computing right now who feel like they're going to crack every crypto sealed code within the next 10 years. It's not impossible. So God knows how long this thing lasts for, or how significant that threat is, or if it can be protected
yeah.
against. That's one for another book, I think. But like, there's so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're going to have about 10 volumes of your
Yeah.
why DeFi matters. We'll be chatting to you in about 2070 when the whole world's been taken over by AI, and we're
Yeah.
on to
Yeah.
we're
Just
talking
remember
from
to
a
always write please when you're asking it to do
I
anything.
do. I
Yeah.
genuinely do. Every single time I use AI, I say, please, can you? And I always say thank you. And I always make sure that I'm being nice to the AI.
Yeah.
It's,
We'll be spared. It's okay.
yeah, yeah, great. Well, we'll chat and there'll be no one else to listen to it.
Yeah.
There'll just be us two. So, another topic then, one you have mentioned in the
Mm.
title, the metaverse. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, this is a really interesting one that I think is something that's a little bit easier to hold on to in terms of understanding what it might be. But I think something that isn't necessarily been discussed so much as how the metaverse might intersect with finance. So could
Yeah.
you share how how it might transform the way that we might think about money or assets or transaction,
Yeah.
or the
For
financial world
sure.
in general?
I think just before I do that, firstly, no one's really agreed on what the metaverse is. It's either augmented reality, virtual reality, or something in between. It's either Web 2 or Web 3, or maybe we do that later as well, that whole conversation.
Hmm.
It's either continuous, where if I own something in one environment, I own it in the next, or it's not. So people aren't really sure of what it is. But if I'm trying to explain it in this context, let's just consider it as a virtual world that we can enter, we can take our personal offline identities into, and we can basically be ourselves in a virtual reality. Now, I think there are so many different ways this can play out. it could be for work purposes, it could be for leisure purposes. Like the idea that I put a headset on and suddenly I'm listening to my favorite band or favorite comedian, something like that. That's quite massive. In terms of finances, I think there are interesting questions and barriers, but also massive opportunities. So, I mean, the opportunities are that we can take our lives online in a different way. We might be able to buy things in a different way. We might be able to do shopping from our own house. We might be able to visualize and interact with things before we, in some sort of fashion before we buy them. The challenging thing, of course, is it's international. So who regulates this stuff? Who figures out the rules of engagement in the metaverse? What currency are you using? Which payment rails are you using? Um, there's a lot there. Also, arbitrage. I mean, whose labor are you going to use? If it's cheaper to hire someone in one country rather than another, who's going to do your work in the metaverse? So I think there's a few things there that really need to get looked into. But I think in terms of personal finance and personal assets, the gear shift might be in time that people start to see their value as being online. They might eventually get to a point where you have assets online and actually they're materially worth something. So, I mean, the kind of outlandish example is the guy who paid hundreds of thousands to be Snoop Dogg's neighbor in the metaverse in the sandbox. Now, that's quite a fun example. But in a way, like sometimes offline and online, they're not that different. The kind of kudos of being Snoop Dogg's neighbor is what the guy's paying for. And these things, this social status will always be important. Proximity will always be important. Your ability to engage and mingle in the right settings or the right environment will always be important. And likewise, if it gets to a point where the metaverse does become this thriving and bustling place to be, where people actually really like it, and some people might actually prefer their life in the metaverse to the real world, which I think would be, could be quite sad, really. But who knows?
Yeah.
Then actually their assets in that world will be really important to them and really valuable to them. So I think what is interesting there is the metaverse could lead us to a situation where people's virtual world holdings are actually a really significant and material part of their life. So I don't think anyone's going to walk into your office right now and be that client. I don't know if you'll see that client anytime soon, but who knows? I think that's the kind of long-term trajectory of that sort of stuff. I mean, ultimately, if the experience is good and you can host concerts in it and you can go to work in it, or you can find various other ways to use this technology to be immersed in something, then I think the potential is massive.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess with that potential and with possibility comes something that you mentioned just then, and that is kind of the ethics, the ethical
Yeah,
considerations of all of this. So with these huge advancements that just show no signs of their rapid development, what do you think are some of the biggest kind of ethical considerations that need to be thought about as we kind of embrace these technological
yeah. So tech in general,
revolution?
right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, there are so many. There are so many. I think one of the big things we see at the moment is, well, crypto, as we know, causes a fair amount of environmental damage. So do loads of other innovations. And I think the problem you've got is people always kind of compare their innovation to something else. So crypto, actually, if you look at the digital assets, I think the environmental impact of it is less than the environmental impact of air conditioning worldwide and things like that. So you can always find ways to say, well, this is okay, this isn't okay. I think there are
Mm.
tricky conversations there because there's no world government looking after all this stuff, and deciding what innovation's worth it and what isn't worth it. What I would also say in terms of crypto and the environment is it's becoming far more environmentally friendly. Ethereum had the merge, quite recently, which reduced its climate impact by 99.9% or thereabouts. So I don't see that as that bad. But anyway, to get into more broad things and get out of crypto a bit, I think data is a massive thing. Data privacy, in terms of open banking and in terms of AI. AI obviously is scraping everything it can find online to create the best outcomes and the best
Mm.
answers. So I think it is kind of worrying that we live in this environment where, yes, personalization is really cool, and I do like the idea that if people can create things that are right for me, then those services will be really beneficial. But at the same time, who's got the data? Where are they storing it? Is it safe? I think cybersecurity verifications, and identity is going to have a really interesting few years as people come to terms with this. Um, AI is just such a massive one too,
Yes,
and
I think that's something I'd quite like to make a little bit of time for as well,
yeah,
considering how much it's been spoken about. Um, just with lots, for nearly all conversations I think I'm
yeah,
having at the moment about, what do you see the future? Where's things going? What are you excited about? And AI never fails to come up. So yeah, could you speak a little bit about
yeah, it's sure.
it's
I mean,
huge? Yeah,
it's got that kind of amazing situation right now where the people that have pioneered it or people that have invested heavily in it are starting to say they're concerned about what it does. And I don't know what to read into that. I don't know if how it's really hard to tell. It's not stopped people from building on it. I think
yeah,
it's really easy to jump to conclusions of AI, and I don't honestly know where it's taking us. But I think for now, I view it as a good thing, and I think the kind of message is to learn how to work with it, rather than to just say this is bad, kill it with fire. I mean, it's not going to go away, and no one is going to kill it with fire.
mm,
Ethically, I think you look at copyright issues, right? You look at people creating work that's really easy, try artworks or written works, and yeah, I mean that's a kind of depends on your take. I'm not mad on that, but what I do think is brilliant about it is that it allows people to do things with simplicity. It allows us to automate tasks that, to be honest, aren't fun for anyone to do. And I like the way that it can build some, some ease into everyday life. I I don't I don't necessarily think it's going to destroy everything, but I do think it needs to be closely monitored, and I do think there's a real need for human sign-off. I mean, let's look at investment portfolios as an example. If you've got an AI looking after your portfolio, and I think you might in time. I mean, so Bloomberg GPT has been created to do something along those lines, and I think the returns from one of its portfolios were massively outsized, something like 600%. Uh, and people will look at that stuff, and I wonder if, much like you've probably had with crypto, if you're an advisor, in time, if someone will start asking, do you use AI for your investment portfolio? Now, that can be really good, but what that bot's probably going to spot is arbitrage. It's not necessarily going to spot anything that's adding economic value. I don't know how it's going to trade or what the impact of that's going to be more broadly. um, it's really hard to tell. We also don't know what happens when bots get together. I mean, this technology is improving so much at this point, but it's not perfect. As we've seen with people trying to use it for legal cases, they found that actually it creates cases that never existed. So I think we need to be very careful about, you know, using it for anything that's high risk, anything that requires a human touch, pretty much. Um, Ethically, it's a really messy area. I don't have all the answers on it clearly, but I'd say don't necessarily expect it to ruin the world, but we should be careful with what we let it do.
your microphone is starting to sound a little bit like a robot at the moment, so I think maybe they're taking
I can't
over.
hear you there, Amelia.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can't hear me.
No, still can't hear you.
Let's see what we can do about that. We'll message the flock team.
Hey, I
That
can
is
see that.
always the go-to. Oh, you can see me move my
You can hear
lips
me
moving,
okay,
but
I
you
think.
can't hear me. I can hear you, yeah. So if I knew sign language or something, that would be great, wouldn't it? But I mean, you can't understand me. You still can't understand me. Um. Oh, Neil. No, still can't hear me. If you try unmuting, let me put it in the chat, Mitch. Or we could ask a question virtually. I have an
Hey,
idea.
I'm back. Hey.
Oh, I was about to ask you a question virtually. I was about to just cut out the
Idea.
middleman and just.
Yeah, so what you'll realize when you work in tech is that you shouldn't buy dodgy knockoff USB adapters from Amazon, which is what's happened there. So I was online the whole time. Yeah, I was. That's because I'm a cheapskate. Sorry about that.
No, no, that's
But yeah,
okay.
I'd kind of run out of steam on the AI and ethics thing because it's just a huge topic. I think there's
Yeah,
so much to it, and I don't think I've got the answers to it just yet. But it's a fascinating area.
absolutely. And there's a couple of questions I want to ask you at the end, but just before I move on to those, from a financial planner's perspective, then, what do you think are the skills or knowledge that individuals might need to kind of thrive in this evolving landscape, in this kind of tech-driven financial landscape?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what kind of company you're working for and what infrastructure you've got as well. I don't think advisors need to be tech people, but they should probably know how to use tech. It kind of falls on the company that's kind of running the show and the business owners to make sure that you've got the best equipment available. And I think that filters into things that clients find valuable, such as client portals, reporting, even like basic. If you've got useful chatbots that cover a lot of kind of everyday things. So what you need to know, I think you just need to kind of be relatively tech savvy. I don't think you need to be a genius on tech. As much as I'd like to sit here and say tech's everything, tech runs the world, you need to do tech. And I do think it's massively important. I look at the advice market as it is today, servicing about 7 or 8% of the population, doing very personal, very face-to-face work, very kind of nuanced stuff. And I think a lot of the value that's added, yeah, tech definitely improves what you do. Tech definitely gives your clients a better experience. But I don't think that it's all about tech right now. I think where tech becomes really interesting to me is when you look at the mass market, when you get more people getting the benefits of financial advice and things similar to that. But again, it's not all tech too. It's the problems that we have and the reasons why people aren't en masse getting anything, getting financial advice. It's largely cultural stuff. It's largely societal stuff. And as any of you probably know, and I had this ever since I started working in this sector, if friends ask you for financial information or guidance, they ask you stuff like which crypto shall I buy, or how can I make like ridiculous returns. They don't usually ask for a balanced and sensible financial plan. So I think the problems that we have are educational, and I think they're societal, probably more so than they are tech. But what I will say is the best companies of the future will embrace tech. They'll be able to see more clients, they'll be able to do it more effectively, they'll have better compliance, better reporting,
Yeah.
and you'll spend more of your time doing the things you enjoy and less of the time doing tasks that could be automated. So I think that's it. I would be looking at, if I was in the earlier stages of my career, I'd be looking, am I working at a company that values tech? That would be really important to me. But I don't think you yourself need to be a programmer or a coder or anything like that. You probably just need to be au fait with the tech you've got, and ideally whatever comes in next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And so we're running out of time. I'm going to move on to our last two questions. And the first one of those is we always like to ask our guests for a book that has helped them in their
Yeah.
career. So do you have a book that comes to mind?
I'm going to give a cheat answer, actually. I'm going to give the
Yeah.
answer of Crypto Wars by Erica Stanford, who I interviewed her on the Wealth Tech Show podcast that I used to run for CityWire. And one, it's a cool book if you want to hear about all the scams and frauds in crypto. And as much as that my book's there to give a kind of balanced view of everything that's going on, the hacks and again, these are human failings, they're not tech failings really. They're actually extraordinary. There's been so much nonsense and craziness going on in this space. So it's a really interesting story. There's so many interesting stories in there. But the reason it's actually kind of helped me in my career was that when I did the interview, I spoke to Erica afterwards and I said to her, I've always loved the idea of writing a book. I've always wanted to, but I don't know how to go about it. So she subsequently gave me some help on how to do that, gave me some guidance on how to pitch it to the publisher. So she, and a massive thank you to her. She's been massively helpful for me in doing that for me. So that book and meeting her actually was, allowed me to do something that I've wanted to do my whole career. So that's the
Yeah.
book I'm picking.
That is a great book to pick. That's so nice. That's really lovely that she gave you so much support.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I honestly, it's again like going through this whole process and interviewing people and getting people's expertise and also just talking. Honestly, I've chewed so many people's ears off about crypto over the last 5 or 6 months that I've honestly, you need, people support you in your career. It's amazing how many people will actually go out of the way to help and support you. So I think one of the great things about the last few months of my career, last year of my career, has been realizing, it's lovely to have that idea of doing it all by yourself, but no one really does that. And actually, there's so many people that help you in your career. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, for sure. And so then that leads on to the last question, which we always ask, but I think is particularly complicated in this context. And that is, what are you most excited to see in the world of finance in the next 10 years?
Yeah, Musk v Zuckerberg too. I think the rematch will have more spice than the original. It's a classic jiu-jitsu versus MMA, clash of styles. I don't know which way it's going to go. My money's on Musk. Um,
Really? Is it?
yeah, size advantage.
Isn't
I'm quite a big guy,
isn't
Amelia.
Mark
I'm biased
Zuckerberg
towards the bigger guy.
he's
Yeah,
training all the time though? Doesn't Elon Musk
true,
say he doesn't do
true,
anything,
true.
and Mark
But
Zuckerberg is like
yeah.
a
I mean, you can do it in the
spicy guy?
metaverse, but can you recreate that? You know, uh,
Okay, you can put your money on Musk. I'll put mine on Zuckerberg, and then
okay, yeah, okay.
we'll see what happens.
Gentleman's bet. But my serious answer, other than must be Zuckerberg 3, would be
Yeah.
um, honestly, I was always fascinated with the idea of financial inclusion and financial advice having some role in that. Now, again,
Mm,
I think it's an education issue. I think it's far, far more than technology, and it's far, far more than just what the financial advice market can do. But I'd love to see more people get the benefit of the kind of conversations that we had, Amelia, when we were traveling around the country speaking to financial
yeah,
planners about managing their finances, just to help set realistic expectations. And also, more importantly, one thing that I loved about this industry and that I saw kind of changing as I was dealing with it was that focus shifting from how much to why. Like, what do I want out of life? How can money serve my interests better? How can I use that as a kind of means to get what I really want out of life? And I think if we can help more people do that kind of stuff, then that's great. I think the economic situation surrounding us sucks, and I
yeah,
think that it's going to really hold us back from achieving many of those things. But my hope is that, as many have tried to do in this industry, that we can really help people to understand the real value of their money and how to prepare for the future, because people are really going to need it.
yeah, definitely. That's a great answer. I did like the Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg answer, but yeah, that's a better one. But yeah, so that's everything then. So I'll just say thank you very, very much for joining me today and helping kind of demystify DeFi, and all that there is in this wild, wild
Oh,
west of a world.
honestly, I was only getting started, but thank you, Amelia. Pleasure to join you.
Thank you. I'll speak to you soon.
I take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.